On this episode, learn how to repurpose and distribute your content.
You're listening to Growth Marketing Toolbox, presented by Growth Marketer. This weekly podcast cuts through the noise to explore the best marketing tools and tactics that are working today, with insights from world-class marketers helping you get more traffic, leads, and sales. And now, here's your host, Nicholas Scalise.
Before we jump into this episode, I want to share a special project I've been working on. It's a free newsletter called Growth Marketer Weekly. Every Thursday morning, I share the most important growth marketing news, tools, and insights so you can become the smartest marketer in the room. If you're enjoying this podcast, I can tell you'll get a lot of value out of the newsletter, so why not join over 4,200 other marketers who are already subscribed? It's absolutely free, and you can sign up at growthmarketer.co or simply hit the link on the show notes page. Hello and welcome to episode 258 of Growth Marketing Toolbox. I'm your host, Nicholas Scalise, and today I'm joined by Vasilina Valchanova. Vasi is a digital strategist, a trainer, and a speaker, and she works on content marketing and conversion rate optimization projects for SaaS products, B2B service companies, and e-commerce brands. She's built digital strategies for SaaS platforms with more than 500,000 active users and e-stores with over $13 million in annual turnover. Vasi, thank you so much for joining me on Growth Marketing Toolbox. How's everything going?
Yeah, everything's great. I'm stoked to be here. I've been a listener of the show myself for a long time, and it's a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Awesome. Yeah, this is a lot of fun. I am a follower of you, and your newsletter is awesome. We actually did an interview on growthmarketer.co a while back where you were, it's just a written interview. So it's great to finally get you on the podcast. And something we're going to be talking about today is content repurposing, something that is near and dear to my heart because as someone who creates a lot of content, I know how important it is not to just create it, but to repurpose it. And you have some awesome strategies to share. Before we get into that though, tell our listeners a little bit more about your background, how you got involved in marketing, and anything else I didn't cover in that intro.
Yeah, happy to. So I've been a marketer for better half of 2 decades now. It's crazy when I look back at it, but it's been a wild journey. I first actually started off my university education and my early career were in PR, so public relations and communications. We were doing a lot of special events, a lot of media events. And that's also like my first experience with the digital sphere. We were actually working with a bunch of bloggers who back at the time were the only type of influencers we're talking about. And in time, I saw that digital was growing. There weren't really a ton of experts to speak of at the time because it was such a new field. So I feel like I was sort of at the right time and in the right place. And I was able to start working and experimenting with digital. I started my own blog. And then I transitioned to marketing positions, mostly in-house positions for the better portion of my marketing experience. And over the last 3 years, I've been an independent marketing consultant, transitioning more on the consulting and agency side, if you will, and working with a variety of different clients, as you mentioned already, mainly in SaaS and e-commerce.
Nice. And so in the intro, I mentioned you specialize in a lot of things, but I mentioned content marketing and conversion rate optimization. Those are 2 of my very favorite topics. But often I find that when I'm speaking with someone about marketing, they see them as completely opposite ends of the spectrum. With content marketing, it's all about distribution, but with conversion rate optimization, it is all about getting people to take action. How do you blend the 2 together and how do you specialize in both? And tell us about, how you came to be good at both of those topics.
Yeah, that's a great point. I have the same experience. Usually people see content marketing as this wildly creative side of marketing, and conversion rate optimization is all about the analytical skill and the numbers. And I think that the answer to your question comes from both my experience and the way my brain works, if you will. So all throughout my career, I've either been the first or only marketer or one of the most senior people in the marketing department. So I had to learn a lot of different bits and pieces, and I've done, frankly, everything save for technical SEO optimization. So it was like all of the other stuff I've tried and tested and worked here and there a bit or more than a bit in different subsections of the marketing stack. So in time, I saw that content was really my passion. So I've been in journalism school. It was something I was excited about. But something that surprised me, frankly, quite a lot was that I was enjoying a lot the analytical side as well. So when I transitioned to freelancing and I was looking at like, okay, like what are the things that I'm going to be specializing in? Because you can't really be like a generalist anymore. You need to have your niche, as it were. I kind of saw content marketing and conversion rate optimization as two sides almost of the same coin, because content marketing is all about doing that interactions with new audiences, attracting their attention and driving that attention that you've already acquired to your products, services, whatever it is. And from then on, it's an easy switch into the conversion rate optimization side of things, because then it's all about, okay, like now that I have these people's attention, how can I seamlessly transition them through the whole marketing funnel and get them to that final, like as the saying goes, profitable customer action that I'm interested in. So it's with that in mind that I said, okay, like people usually find content and CRO completely different, but they're actually very a logical combination for a person to specialize in my experience.
Yeah, that's an awesome breakdown. I couldn't have said it any better myself. I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it. You have to have both sides of the coin. For this episode, we're going to be focused on content marketing, but oh man, I feel like we got to get you back already on a future episode to talk about CRO, because I know there's so much we could cover there. But on the topic of content marketing, I know we probably have a lot of listeners right now who are creating content, whether it be social content or blog posts or video content on YouTube, but maybe they're not thinking as much, or maybe they want to focus more on repurposing content. Tell us, why is content repurposing something that marketers should pay attention to? And yeah, just what it means when we say content repurposing.
So yeah, I'll start with the latter question first. So content repurposing is any type of activity where you're taking content you've already worked on or even fully developed already, and then transforming that content through a variety of different tactics that we'll get into later in order to do a few different things. And that's where like why repurposing content matters is comes to mind. So first off, the biggest tragedy that I see day in and day out when working with clients is that most of them have already pretty good content to begin with. Like they're already working on creating content, and that content is actually high quality. So we do see a lot of noise in the content space currently, but actually in my experience, the quality of content is not so much an issue anymore, because there's so much written and there's so much talk about you need to have quality content. And there are some very experienced creators who are already helping brands create that content. But then when it comes to actually, publishing that content, setting it free in the real world, that's where the work stops for a lot of people. And then they start wondering, oh God, like, why didn't this work? Why we're not getting any eyeballs whatsoever on this like amazing piece of content that we've already developed? And what I usually see that people would just, push that content out, share it once on their social media accounts, and that's it, job done. While when we're talking about repurposing content, it's all about you worked so hard on what you already have created. So why are you gonna just let it go the moment you hit publish? That doesn't really make sense. So repurposing content helps with maximizing those efforts, increasing that, like what I call return on content. So what's the benefit your business gets from a single content creation effort? You've worked a lot. So if you can have 6 different pieces of content stemming out of that initial content creation effort, then that's way better than just one piece of content, right?
Interesting. Yeah, I like what you mentioned there about return on content, because I'm sure we've all heard of return on investment or ROI. And if we're in the Facebook or Google Ads space, we've probably heard of ROAS or return on ad spend. I have not heard of return on content, but that seems like that would be a great North Star metric for content marketers to focus on. Is that something that you track? And if so, like how would we really try to keep an eye on return on content?
Well, it really depends on the organization's current marketing goals, or even if we start earlier in the process of the business objectives, the marketing goals, how marketing is supporting those business objectives, and then how content marketing fits into that mix. Usually, what we do with our clients is a mix of awareness and audience building activities. So pushing that like top of the funnel and getting those people interested in the brand as a whole. And then going into more targeted specific content campaigns where we're going to push for people in the middle or bottom of the funnel, where we'd create content that's much more intent driven and oriented towards pushing for a sale or like, a contact with a B2B sales team or whatever, the company is working on. So these are some of the basics. And the way to bring that back to our topic today, when we're talking about content repurposing, it helps both of those broad categories of goals, because when we're talking about like attracting new audiences, obviously the more content you push out and the more different ways you can use your content in different channels, reformatting that in different content formats, you'll be reaching new audiences with every single piece. And then when it comes to the middle and bottom of the funnel, the more times you talk about that high quality content online, the more traffic you're going to get, the more eyeballs you're going to get, and potentially the more sales you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, I love it. It all ties together. Now, when it comes to content repurposing, there's so many different approaches. Do you see any mistakes people are making that they should avoid right off the bat? Or are there any common myths or misconceptions about content repurposing you want to share?
I think that the major one that I already kind of hinted at was that, your job is done once you hit publish and share that once on social media accounts. One thing I see a lot of brands being skittish about is resharing older content and bringing attention back to pieces that are still relevant today. It's even hard for me sometimes when I start surfacing older content again and again, because as the marketer, you've seen that, and your brain works in a way where it tells you, surely everyone's seen that. Everyone who wanted to click on that link has already done so. But what I've been seeing with some experiments I've been running, especially over the past few months, resurfacing older content, we see that we're getting fresh new traffic from people who it's not so much the case that they didn't, like, they've seen it before and they didn't want to click on it. It's that it either wasn't the right moment or they didn't see that content at all. So yeah, I think that's the major part of my brain that I constantly need to rewire when working on repurposing.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'll share something again and then I'll say, oh, I've already shared this with my audience. But then you really don't realize how little reach a piece of content gets sometimes. Even if you have a large audience, not everyone is going to see it just because you shared it. So that's a really good point that, if you are going to reshare something, as long as it's still relevant, and maybe you can put a new spin on it, there's a very good likelihood that when you originally shared it, you didn't share it with everybody, even if you put it out there into the world. So there's an opportunity to reshare. But on that point, I think, it's an important distinction to make, that when we talk about content repurposing, it's not just about sharing content or, sharing it on social. Because I think that's when I first learned about this topic, that's what I automatically thought about was, oh, this just means resharing a piece of content on social. But there's other nuances to content repurposing, like actually recreating a piece of content, chopping it up, taking a piece of content and putting it into a different format. Can you tell us a little bit more about that distinction between just sharing a piece of content versus actually working it into some new format?
Yeah, you're definitely right. There's a lot of misconceptions around that terminology and what we're talking about. If we're talking about repurposing that we've been discussing so far, or the other element of that, which is content distribution. So if I have to sort of draw the distinction between the two, content repurposing is about making content creation more efficient. It's about taking that one piece of content and changing it up, mixing it up so that it can live a new life, live a different life in a different channel, in front of a different audience, and so on and so forth. That usually involves tactics like chunking it up, like if you have a really long blog post and you want to share different bits and pieces of it in like a LinkedIn post, that would be an example. Or changing the format completely, getting a text piece converted into a video, or just reading up your blog post and creating an audio version of that piece of content, as it were. So these are just some of the basic examples. Then it comes to content distribution, and that's more focused around getting more eyeballs on your original piece of content. So you're not so much interested in how these different formats perform as a whole, as a combination. You're not looking at every single content consumption moment as a way you're reaching that audience in an efficient way. You're actually looking at, okay, what are the different channels that I can use to bring people back to this original piece of content? So you want them to read the original or to consume the original if it's in a different format, but you don't really share a lot in the other channels. You're more teasing it out. So this is your typical, Facebook post where you're saying, hey, I have a new blog post. It's all about this and this and that. Click here to learn more. That's more in the vein of content distribution. But I think that there's also the fact that these aren't usually completely separate things. They, in my mind, work as a kind of a spectrum. So you have some initiatives you can do where you'll be both repurposing content but also doing distribution, because in the end you want to bring people back to the original. So it's sort of a weird way of thinking about it as a spectrum. But if you think of, let's say, if you do an interview and then you share a piece of that interview, a 2-minute clip, let's say, on LinkedIn, for example, then what you're doing is both repurposing, because if a person hears that specific clip, they'll move away from that with a whole new idea in their mind. So they've consumed the content. This has brought some type of value to them. So in that sense, it's repurposing it, moving it to a new channel, moving it in a different, more visual format or whatever. But still, you probably want to show people that this 2-minute clip is part of a bigger conversation that they can listen to. So it's also a distribution effort for a full interview episode. So that's where these things get a little bit, all mixed up together, because, marketing is always messy. So that's also a reflection of that.
No, I think that's awesome. And that's a really good distinction between repurposing and distribution. And, I can totally see, as you were saying that, examples that I've done where I'll take a clip from a podcast episode, put it on LinkedIn, and maybe it's 1 minute. And I'll say, hey, if you want to check out the full episode, you can check it out by, listening to Growth Marketing Toolbox in your favorite podcast app. But I'll notice there's also usually a conversation that gets started in that thread just around that 1 minute clip. And I'm sure many folks are not even aware that there's a full episode. So yeah, I could see where that piece of content could stand on its own. And it also pushes the audience towards the full episode. So I like the connection there between repurposing and distribution. What I think would be helpful, and you don't have to go into too much detail, is just to get an idea for the process you follow. Because from everything I've seen from what you've created and with your newsletter, you're very organized, and I love that. And I would love to share with our listeners just your process of how you think about this entire thing that we're talking about, from an initial idea to creating the content to then repurposing and distributing. Maybe walk us through that real quick.
Sure, I'll be happy to. So I think that we were talking earlier about myths and mistakes, and that's also one common thing that I see, is that people would start thinking about repurposing and distribution too late in the process, while it works so much better if you're planning your content out with repurposing in mind. So, for example, we're now recording this podcast as a video as well, which is a nice thing for your content strategy. It's a way to, down the line, maybe at one point, start publishing these video episodes as their own separate thing. Maybe it's about, as you said, like taking 1-2 minute clips from the interview and sharing that. And it always works better if it's a visual format, right?
Yep.
So thinking about it from the start lets you use some opportunities that it's going to be too late for if you wait until after actually finishing that original piece and pushing it out. Because, if I'm doing an interview with an expert for my blog and, I publish that piece, and at that point I start thinking about repurposing, recording a video of us doing the actual interview won't be an option anymore. So it really helps to almost brainstorm with, even on your own or with your team if you're working in a bigger team. Brainstorm ideas on how this content can live in different ways after you hit publish, even before starting to write that piece. So in my experience, I've actually tried to narrow that down to 6 different content repurposing methods. So these are, I'm gonna go in like the most common to those that are a bit more specific or a bit more abstract. So first off, it's changing the format, blog post to audio, podcast episode to a video series to a podcast, because it can always go anywhere, one of those ways, and so on. And this is often across from one medium to another, so from video to text and so on, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. For example, creating a PDF version of a blog post and sharing that with, I don't know, an online library or a community somewhere. This is a text-to-text reformatting of that content. The second one would be changing the channel in which you're distributing that content. So that's the 1 minute outtake going on Facebook, for example. Or an even better example would be, if you're streaming a live video, you can be streaming both on Facebook, at the same time streaming on YouTube Live, and then at the same time, maybe, I don't know, like doing a Twitter space or whatever. Like it can go in a lot of different channels. Then the third one would be changing the owner, as I call it, or like the publication. So, for example, I've written a blog post about content repurposing that goes in a lot of detail, but I'm here talking on your show as a guest about repurposing. So guest blogging would come here, or collaborating with another creator in some shape or form. This will allow you to find a new audience as well. So that's sort of the next one, like changing the audience. If you know that one person will be in some medium, but they won't be present in another, you can move to a different, it can be a different channel. It can be even going from offline to online, like, for example, recording a conference or streaming it straight online, doing a hybrid event, as is the custom nowadays in these interesting times we live in.
Yeah, for sure.
Then the next one would be just changing the scope, so narrowing it down. So the outtake would actually be, now that I talk about it, more of an example of that. So taking a long piece and creating a short piece out of it, Or if you have like, let's say a podcast, blog post series, you'll be able to combine several blog posts into an ebook down the line or something like that. And then the final one would be almost like changing the author. So what you were saying earlier, so about getting a discussion in the comment section of sharing something on LinkedIn. What if you can take the insights of that discussion and you can bring those into a future piece of content, or even recap that in a new LinkedIn post or something like that?
Interesting. Wow. So there's a lot to it. There's the format, the channel, the owner, the audience, the scope, the author. There's a lot of opportunity with repurposing. I think that's a huge takeaway here. You mentioned you created a book about this or a training. If people want to learn more in depth than what we're covering on this episode, where's the best place for them to do that?
It's actually a blog post that I have, but it's like the length of it is almost like an ebook. So yeah, I think that would be nice. We can add a link to that in the show notes and people.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah, everything we cover will be in the show notes at growthmarketingtoolbox.com/258, or you can just click on the show notes if you're in a podcast app. Another thing I want to talk about, and you mentioned this briefly, is doing things yourself versus getting help. Do you have a team? Like what? Yeah. How do you keep up with all this stuff?
So for most of the projects I work with, it's usually in conjunction with an in-house marketing team. So we would, in the case of content repurposing, we would devise the whole strategy. We would plan the content out, and they'll actually be carrying out the production of the content and then the repurposing of it. When it comes to my own content, I really like doing the day-to-day myself, because then I have a better idea of what's changing in like algorithms, in content production, trends, let's say, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of, for my own blog, it's sort of a sandbox, and at the same time, it's like an experiment lab where I can try to do things on my own and see what I need to tell clients when I start working with them. So that's sort of the mix where I'm going after.
Nice. And then what about tools? Tell us about the different tools you're using to track your ideas, to create the content, to publish it, repurpose, all that stuff.
So there are a bunch of really great tools that people can look into depending on what content they're currently creating and what's the repurposing of it. One of the ones that I started using most recently and I absolutely love, it's called Headliner. So for people doing podcasts, that's an absolutely amazing thing. It's basically you can connect your podcast feed to it and create short outtakes that look really well and shared on social media. So you can add your graphics, it adds a small like voice wave to the piece, and it actually exports it as an MP4 video so you can share it on social media. So for podcast outtakes, that's absolutely amazing. When it comes to a video, I generally rely on iMovie for most of the work that I do. And if I need to do something more serious, I would go after Adobe Premiere. I've been using that for some time now. It has a big, steep learning curve.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. But since I've been using it in the past, it's sort of like easier for me. And you don't need to know everything. I mean, I'm no video whiz, but I can add, like a short animation with like the title of the person that we're doing an interview with or something like that. And when it comes to social media sharing and repurposing, I think like the two things that I definitely need to mention, one is Canva. I use it on almost all the projects I work on, be it with bigger brands or with smaller teams. What we've done in the past, and it's a really nifty trick, is that we've created, with the help of a designer, we've created templates for some of our repurposing content types. And then we've sort of recreated that same template on Canva. And it's much easier because like most marketers are not necessarily familiar with Photoshop, or they wouldn't have access to it because the licenses are pretty expensive. But you can sort of like have the best of both worlds in that way. So that's a really nifty way of going about it. And then the other thing that I use on a daily basis is definitely CoSchedule for content sharing and promotion. We started off talking about resurfacing older content and so on. And that's my favorite thing about CoSchedule. It has this requeue feature that lets you add a bunch of different social media posts to this queue, as they call it. And then you give it some parameters, for example, how often to share content, making sure that it doesn't repeat the same piece of content more than, let's say, once a month or something like that. And then when it sees an empty slot in your social media calendar on one of your social accounts, it would automatically populate that with old content that you've added to it. Yeah, that's I learned about it like a year ago, and like the friend who told me about it, I feel like I need to send him like a crate of craft beer or something to say thanks.
Nice.
It's just
I'm gonna have to
amazing
check it
when I see
out. Yeah, because I've used Buffer and Agora Pulse and Sprout Social, but I haven't heard of that specific feature. I've heard of CoSchedule, so yeah, I'm definitely going to check that one out.
Yeah. And then like your usual, project management stuff. I think like I've gone through all of them, frankly. And I think we've stuck for most projects with Trello because it's just like simpler and easier to use for a lot of people. And like, it's one of those things where you want to make sure that you don't hear oh, I couldn't like make my way around that, and that's
Right.
why I didn't do my
Yeah.
work.
Or you need an hour training session just to get onboarded. We use Asana internally at our agency, but then whenever we have to share something with clients that requires them to be involved in the project management process, we also use Trello because it's just so much easier.
Yeah.
And then what about, where do you do the actual writing? And like, how do you keep track of the different ideas that you want to cover on your blog, for instance?
So for that one, I personally rely on a mix of old school handwriting. I'm a big fan of the bullet journal method of keeping notes and so on. I even have like my trusty journal over here on the side,
Nice.
So yeah. And I usually have that close at hand. So I would generally jot down basic ideas and stuff like that in some collections in that. When I already feel happy with like what I have in there, I would first move some of the ideas that are already like not just a nugget of an idea, but a well formulated idea for a blog post. I would move that to Todoist. That's
okay.
the
Yeah.
to-do
Love to do it.
listing app. Yeah. I also am a huge fan of that. And then when I actually move that out, and that's where I do my planning. So, for example, I'd open at the end of the previous month, I'll open Todoist and move things around and see like what are the blog posts I want to work on in this particular month. And then the writing just happens in Google Docs usually.
Interesting. Yeah. Can't live without Google Docs these days.
Yeah. They also have a very nice add-on that you can use if you're using WordPress for your blog. And that's
like an integration between the two?
Yeah, exactly. So it's I don't know if it has a specific name, but if you search like Google Docs and WordPress integration, you'll probably like stumble right across it. So the way it works is that once you're done with your blog post in Google Docs, and that's also where like I use, let's say, Grammarly to polish things around and remove any typos. Once that's done, you just push one button and it gets moved to a draft in WordPress.
Wow. Oh wow.
And the best thing about this is that it keeps your formatting. So the H1, H2, H3 headings are already pre-formatted when you go into your
yeah, that's a pain.
platform.
I always do it manually when moving it over to WordPress. I'm going to have to check out that integration.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, you covered so many awesome tools. I'll put them all in the show notes at growthmarketingtoolbox.com/258. So if anyone wants to check out Headliner or Todoist or the Google Docs integration with WordPress or CoSchedule, check out the notes. So as we wrap up, are there any exciting updates you want to share with our listeners or anything else before we go?
So one of the things that I'm working on starting this year is actually finding more interactive ways to communicate with my audience. And that's a huge sort of undertaking. But the way that this will be going is to have a lot more like, I know, like either it's going to be like a community focus or even like in-person sessions online or something like that. The best place, like the place where this started is that I get so much feedback from my newsletter, and I just start, going back and forth in emails with newsletter subscribers who say that what I write about resonated with them, or who answer my weekly question that I include in the newsletter. And I just thought that email is not necessarily the best medium for that.
True.
So I'm planning on expanding that. I think the best way to keep up with that would be just to, subscribe to the newsletter and to learn about it as I sort of stumble my way across finding that new format.
Nice. Yes, I highly recommend everyone to subscribe to your newsletter. I'll put a link at the top of the show notes. It's one of my favorite marketing newsletters, and I subscribe to a lot, but I read very few of them. And yours is one that I read every time. So I think it's awesome. I can tell you put a lot of work into it. So definitely subscribe.
You're too kind. Thanks.
And as a newsletter creator myself, like I know people often don't want to reply because they feel like maybe they're bothering the creator, or it's just going to go into some unread folder. But I can tell you, it really helps us get feedback to make the newsletter better. It sounds like you really, take interest in getting those replies and responding. And I do the same thing. So yeah, so everyone go reply to more newsletters. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with the responses you get from those creators. Awesome. If our listeners want to connect with you or connect on social media or follow you on social media, where's the best place for them to do all that?
So LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the spaces where I'm most active now. You can just include the links in the show notes and people will be able to find me, because I feel that, writing out my name with all of its Slavic exotic differences, it's going to be hard for people. I think those two places are the best ones. And if you go to my website, which is vouchanovo.me, you'll find all the links there as well. So,
fantastic. We'll put everything in the show notes. Awesome. Well, Vasi, this has been a lot of fun. I learned some things too. I really like that phrase, return on content. I'm going to start using that. And you shared some really good ways to think about content repurposing and content distribution. And now I'm going to think about those as two separate things instead of grouping them together like I had been doing. So this was super informative for me. I know it was super informative for our listeners. And I just want to say thank you. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Yeah, thank you too for the invite, and have a great day, you and all of the listeners who've been with us now.
Okay, take care. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Growth Marketing Toolbox. Don't forget to check out all the resources in the show notes. And if you're looking for short form content, I've been creating a lot of videos over on TikTok. So I'll put a link to my TikTok profile in the show notes, or you could simply head over to growthmarketingtoolbox.com/TikTok. Hope to see you there. And until next time, take care.
Growth Marketing Toolbox is presented by Growth Marketer and produced by Earnworthy LLC.